Today's chat could revolutionise the way you think about skincare.
They put this bacterial enzyme into human cells and it repaired the DNA of the human cells. And that was mind-blowing. Every cell of your body has to have a way of repairing tens of thousands of damaged spots. Otherwise, you'd fall apart.
Even normal human skin looking normal, doing its job, actually harbours a huge amount of DNA mutations.
What if we told you the most important step in skin health happens before we even apply those?
One of the first findings of increasing DNA repair using our enzymes was that you could prevent immune suppression. And then not only don't actinic keratoses appear, but the ones that are there regress.
There is a lot of regret in my clinic, and nobody has ever regretted putting on their SPF.
Welcome to the Skin Diaries podcast, Skin Aging Unlocked, and today we've got something really, really special. But before we get to that, I am Fiona Clark. I'm your co-host for the day. I'm a journalist, author, and menopause charity founder and lover of a good science chat. And with me, as always, is the wonderful Clare Kiely, a dermatologist with a special interest in skin cancer. She has advanced training in skin aging and aesthetics and is the co-founder of the Skin Diary. Now, today's chat could revolutionise the way you think about skincare. Most of us normally think about ingredients in skincare that can improve the quality or the feel or the texture of the skin, things like retinoids, peptides or antioxidants that will help sort of turn back the clock on ageing and skin damage. But what if we told you the most important step in skin health happens before we even apply those? Today's guest is Dan Yarosh, a molecular scientist, author, and the scientist credited with pioneering the use of DNA repair enzymes in skincare. More than a decade or so ago, Dan was studying how cells repair the damaged DNA and realised that the same enzymes responsible for repairing DNA in living organisms like plankton could be delivered into human skin. That's led to one of the most fascinating chapters in skincare science, enzymes that can recognise and repair UV-induced DNA damage inside skin cells. These enzymes were so effective that they almost became approved as medicines, but ultimately ended up in skincare instead. So that's what we're talking about today, how DNA repair actually works and whether supporting DNA repair might be the missing step in modern skincare. Dan Yarosh, welcome to the podcast. You're often described as the godfather of DNA repair in skincare. You were studying these in bacteria, but how did that evolve into putting it into skincare?
Well, I was a basic science researcher. I was at the National Cancer Institute. I was headed in a career path of being a pointy-headed scientist in an ivory tower. And then a paper was published a long time ago in the 70s. And these scientists from Japan did was take an enzyme from a bacterial virus and put it into human cells using a detergent. So kind of a harsh treatment, but they put this bacterial enzyme into human cells and it repaired the DNA of the human cells. And that was mind-blowing. First of all, the idea that bacterial enzymes could work in humans at the time, the assumption was it wasn't, it couldn't possibly work. And the second was the idea that you could isolate an enzyme and speed up this normal repair process. So that's what really got me thinking about it. But life got in the way. I got married, I had children, and I was working in Washington. And then I had an opportunity to start a biotech company. And that was forefronted in my mind. How can we take these enzymes and not just use them as research tools, but can we repair DNA in human skin? And the first challenge was to find a way to get it in. Understanding enzymes, and I was a biochemist, I knew how to make them, but the real breakthrough was in figuring out a way to get them into skin. And that's when we invented the liposomal delivery system, which are little vesicles, microscopic, that are composed of lipids and oils, and captured inside of them are the purified DNA repair enzymes. And so that was the trick to allow us to get enzymes into human skin. And then we started doing work, and they work. The enzymes that we chose, even though they were from bacteria or plankton, or in one case a mustard plant, even though they were from all these different sources, they all knew what to do when they saw damaged DNA.
Wow. We'll get to that in more depth in a minute. But when you started off doing this work, how radical was it? Were people thinking that, this is crazy, it's never going to work?
Yes, there was quite a bit of that. In fact, when I did my first experiments at my postdoctoral work, we had a bet in the laboratory, about 50-50 each way, said it would never work, and the other half thought it was worth a try. And so everyone was quite surprised when we did. In that era, there were two kingdoms. There was bacteria and there were higher organisms, and there was no reason to think one could recognize the other system. So since then, we have a much more detailed understanding of the commonalities of all of life. And it turns out almost every living cell has a DNA repair system. That's how important it is.
For people who aren't that familiar with DNA, let's have a skim back just basically on what is DNA. I love a triple barrel question, so this has got a lot in it. What is DNA? What does sun exposure do to it? And why does it matter to me?
Sure. Well, so the DNA is present in every single cell of your body, and it contains the blueprint of how to make a human being. And the blueprint is read in letters, 4 letters, A, G, C, T. We've all heard about that. And it's the order of those letters that give information, and the cell reads that information off the DNA, and then it goes about doing its work. It makes proteins, and those proteins do all the machinery work of the cell. So without DNA, your cell wouldn't know what to do. And in addition, the DNA is used to pass on the information to daughter cells and to the next generation. So it's really a remarkable molecule. The problem is it's susceptible to damage. There's lots of bad stuff in the environment. There's free radicals, which are always looking to steal an electron from somebody. And DNA's got lots of them, so it's a target for oxidation. And also, it turns out that DNA absorbs ultraviolet light. The photons of ultraviolet light strike the DNA and are absorbed, and that energy goes into doing some chemistry that ruins the DNA. So it's a nice molecule, but it's susceptible to damage. Now, it's a big book, and it's just like reading a novel. If you come to a couple of pages that are stuck together because the book's damaged, well, it might not be a problem if it's at the beginning of the book. But if those 2 pages are stuck together right at the climax of the plot, when the murderer is revealed, the whole book can be ruined if you stick the 2 pages together. That's the same situation in DNA. Most damage is repaired and we don't notice it, but there's so much damage that goes on. Without a repair system, we wouldn't be able to survive. The estimates are in every single cell of your body, there's between 10 and 50,000 damaged sites every day. So
Wow.
every cell of your body has to have a way of repairing tens of thousands of damaged spots. Otherwise, you'd fall apart.
And so this is where your repair enzymes come in. So what do they do and how do they work?
So repair enzymes recognize the damage. They're like a lock and a key. They're the lock, and their lock is shaped specifically for a type of damage. So they don't bind to the DNA if it's normal, but they recognize certain types of damage which has very characteristic chemical changes. It makes the DNA bulge in a certain way, and the proteins bind to that damaged site, and they know what to do. They make a small break in the DNA on one strand, and they chop away at the damaged site, and then other enzymes come in and use the opposite strand of DNA as the template in order to resynthesize normal DNA. So this process goes on all the time. And it's good, but it's not great. So, for example, if you get a sunburn, it takes about a day to remove 50% of the damage, and then another day to remove 25% of the damage. So it's good, but it's not great. And remember, the DNA is being used all the time as a blueprint. You got to read the book to figure out what to do. It's a matter of speed. If you need to use the book and the book hasn't been repaired, then you're in trouble. It's not the total amount of repair, it's the speed of repair that determines what happens. And so the whole idea of our DNA repair enzymes is to speed up that rate of repair. So for example, when you use one of our DNA repair enzymes, that 50% number is reached in 6 hours instead of 24 hours. And with another one of our enzymes, the photolyase, this is an enzyme that binds to DNA and then absorbs visible light and uses that visible light to reverse the damage. So that's instantaneous. Plants have this enzyme, but humans have the gene, but we've hijacked the protein to do something else. And so we've got to add it back. And so the photolyase binds to DNA and absorbs visible light to do work and repairs the damage instantaneously. So
Wow.
it's really adding these enzymes to speed up a normal repair process.
I don't know if you can see my skin from where you are, but Claire knows I literally am, being an Australian, a walking actinic keratosis. So Claire, I mean, you see people like me every day. How important for the patients that you see is something like this?
Thanks, Fiona. Really, really important. And that's why we are so privileged to have Dan here today. I just wanted to say that, you can tell from listening to him that he is an incredibly brilliant scientist, but he's also able to describe these very complicated processes in terminology that we all understand. And it's great because what we're really trying to do here is bring this extraordinary skincare ingredient into the spotlight. I kind of feel like it's been hiding in plain sight, especially here in Europe for many years now. And Dan is a real pioneer of this biotech in skincare that is now becoming fashionable. But he was doing it many years ago, discovering how enzymes in nature could be used to deliver DNA repair enzymes into our skin. But coming back to your question, Fiona, yes, the skin is incredible in that we now know that it harbours an incredible amount of mutations. So even normal human skin, which is functioning normally, looking normal, doing its job, actually harbours a huge amount of DNA mutations. In some cases, some studies have shown that it has the same amount of mutations as some solid organ tumours, in fact. So, talking about things like breast cancer and prostate cancer, but it still looks and functions normally. What is happening is from basically the day you're born, from the day dot, you're accumulating this damage throughout your life in the skin. And that ends up in becoming something called genomic instability as it kind of accumulates through your life. And genomic instability, you might have heard of, as one of these hallmarks of aging now. It's classified as a hallmark of aging. But actually, DNA damage from UV exposure leads to a whole spectrum of damage in the skin. So, you're talking about things like skin cancers and pre-cancers like actinic keratosis. But there's also photo damage, and there's also even inflammation and problems with immune response in the skin. So DNA repair is a really important process in the skin. And for those of you who are just interested in aging, we do know that 80 to 90% of aging is what we call photo damage, and most of that photo damage is caused by these cyclobutane pyrimidine dimers, which are directly UV-induced signature DNA lesions, we call them. Photolyase, which is one of the most fascinating DNA repair enzymes, I think, can repair those dimers. And Dan, you have a really great way of explaining how photolyase works, so I'd love if you could share that analogy with us.
Sure. Well, as I was saying, the photolyase comes from plants. We have them in marsupials, in reptiles, but somehow along the way, mammals don't have this enzyme. But this enzyme is really, as you said, amazing. It binds to DNA at the site of cyclobutane pyrimidine dimers. It recognizes a kink that the DNA damage causes in the DNA. And it sits there and it has a photoreceptor, an antenna, that's looking for photons of light. And when it absorbs that light, it uses the energy to reverse the damage. So instead of the two bases being stuck together, which is what a cyclobutane pyrimidine dimer is, as I said, like 2 pages of a book being stuck together, it uses the visible light energy to break the bonds apart and separate the book. And now you have the code is back, you can read it. And this happens instantaneously. The light that can activate this enzyme is visible light, so indoor light. It's even outdoor light. Wavelengths of blue light are the most effective in activating this enzyme. So even though we don't have it, when the enzyme gets inside of our cells, it knows exactly what to do, which is pretty amazing, I think.
And part of this story involves the Nobel Prize for Chemistry. That's the part that describes the process of photoreactivation, isn't it?
Yes, yes. Well, I have a little backstory for that. So my postdoctoral work was in the laboratory of Richard Setlow, and he was, everyone acknowledged, the pioneer in DNA repair. So I was lucky enough to be in his laboratory. The Nobel Prize Committee was contemplating awarding it to DNA repair in 2014, and I'm pretty sure Dick Setlow's name was at the top of the list. Unfortunately, he passed away in April of 2015, and the Nobel Prize is never awarded posthumously. So they selected 3 DNA repair experts who have sterling credentials, outstanding research contributions, And so in 2015, the Nobel Prize in Medicine was awarded to these three pioneers of DNA repair, one of which unraveled how photolyase worked, Aziz Shankar of North Carolina, and two others who were experts, Lindahl and Deutsch, who were outstanding research scientists. But in my heart, I believe if Dick Setlow had survived another year, he would have won the award.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. And thank you so much for the paper that you wrote and published in 2019. 6 critical questions for DNA repair enzymes. I had Fiona reading it during the week and she was also fascinated.
Yeah,
So
it's brilliant.
when I read that back in 2019, pre-COVID era, it was like getting slapped across the face with a wet fish, honestly, Dan, because, as a consultant, I've been doing skin cancer for years. I have fellowships in skin cancer. I'm a Mohs surgeon, so to read something that was describing how these DNA repair enzymes could be put into a topical skincare product and do this was really fascinating. It was great because I think the whole concept is almost too extraordinary for us to really believe. Even as dermatologists, a lot of people felt it was a bit far-fetched and I think dismissed it because of that. In your paper, you dig into the research and, there's a really strong scientific consensus from lots of different labs all around the world, all pointing in the same direction. And I think what's incredible about these enzymes is that we have so much data about the whole process of how they work. So the process from exactly where the DNA damage is formed on the double helix to how the enzyme is encapsulated, how that encapsulated enzyme is put into liposomes and gets through the stratum corneum, where it has to go in the cell. I know you've done studies, even radio labeling these enzymes to see that they're actually getting to the place they need to be. So I don't think there's any other skincare ingredient that has that level of precise mechanistic data. So, it really is really fascinating.
Well, thank you. I wrote the paper because I kept getting the same questions over and over again. And I was always giving the answers. And then it just occurred that, well, why don't I lay out these 6 questions? They're tough questions. They're the ones that everybody asked me. I didn't pull any punches. And I didn't try to focus on the molecular biology and explain the cellular mechanisms. I wanted there to be the clinical data. Does it work in people? What is the evidence that they get into skin? And what's the clinical evidence? How does it work in people? Because in the end, all the pointy-headed scientific things don't matter if it doesn't work in people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a bit more then about how it does actually work in people. You mentioned before getting it across the skin barrier in a bit of detergent. So I'm assuming that happened in a dish and not on a human. But when it comes to us, what do the studies actually show about how effective it is in terms of preventing or reducing actinic keratosis?
Right. So the first thing to understand, there's 2 different parts about actinic keratosis. One is preventing them from appearing, and the other is causing them to regress. So many people get actinic keratosis and then they disappear after some time. And that's likely because the immune system recognizes the damage and the actinic keratosis, the precancer, and gets rid of it. One of the first findings was that when you increase DNA repair, you prevent immune suppression. So the sun suppresses your immune system, and that allows cancers to grow out. And one of the most important triggers for that immune suppression is DNA damage. So the cell's damaged, it sends out signals to the other cell, look, I'm damaged, we got to fix this, bring in some blood, stop the immune system so that I have a chance to repair. And that immune suppression is what allows cancers to grow out. So many of the clinical studies show that when you use DNA repair enzymes, not only do you stop the appearance of new actinic keratoses, but existing actinic keratoses disappear. Because by repairing the DNA damage, you take away the signal for immune suppression, and that immune suppression is what allows cancers to grow out. As a side note on this, there's organ transplants have become very, very common. And they work because you suppress the immune system of the patient when you're giving them a new organ. And skin cancers are so frequent in these people who receive immune suppression therapy that dermatologists are now assigned to a transplant team because from day one they have to worry about skin cancers growing out from immune suppression. So one of the first findings of increasing DNA repair using our enzymes was that you could prevent immune suppression. And then what's been observed in the clinical studies is that not only don't actinic keratoses appear, but the ones that are there regress. And so that's this interplay between science and cosmetics and skincare that's really fascinating to me.
So you mentioned before about how it got across the skin barrier. Can you explain a little bit more about how those little liposomes actually work and where they get to and how they actually dissolve where they need to?
Right, so these liposomes are composed of the same lipids that are in the human skin membranes. So cells are composed of membranes, and we took the same lipids that go into making that membrane and we use them in the liposomes. So the liposomes look like skin cells to the skin. In addition, we put in a little chemical trick that causes them to be destabilized when they're in an acidic environment. So the skin is a little bit below neutral pH, it's a little bit acidic. So the liposomes are on the surface, they're driven into the skin by the correct formulation, and then they're taken up into the cells by a cholesterol binding site because there's cholesterol in the liposome, and the cell recognizes this as, oh, this is another membrane, let's attach to it. The enzyme is encapsulated inside that liposome and then is carried into the cell by this process, and it enters an acidic environment inside the cell where it's taken up, go into a lysosomal sac, and that's a low pH. And this is the trigger for the liposome to open up. It explodes inside the cell and releases the enzyme inside the cell. This might all sound like science fiction, but one of our collaborators did electron microscopy on skin and identified liposomes inside cells, and we actually published a picture of a liposome exploding
Oh, wow.
and releasing enzymes. And we knew that the enzyme was there because we used an antibody with a little gold bead. And in the electron micrograph, you see all these little tiny black dots, which are where the enzyme has been located.
Yeah.
So we know exactly where the liposome goes, and they were engineered to open up. And that was the big breakthrough, and that was the subject of our first patents. That was the foundation of the company, figuring out this liposome delivery system.
Yeah.
And as I said, we have pictures in skin of where the lipids go, where the protein goes, and then this electron micrograph of a liposome blowing up inside a cell.
It's just an incredible amount of biotechnology that has just gone into what you've explained. I mean, one of the things I think that people don't realize is when you see something as simple as plankton extract on an inky, that actually all of that huge level of biotech is what's behind that. A lot of dermatologists would think, well, you know, if it's an enzyme, it's just going to degrade. It's going to be really, really unstable, which was always the problem for years. And if you put an enzyme on your skin, it's just going to have degraded, and how is it going to get through? And that was the key crucial cathartic step really that Dan solved for, was getting these enzymes into the liposome, stabilizing them and getting them across the skin, and then proving that it all worked. It was just phenomenal. But that's also one of the issues that we have in skincare, is telling people this story, because I know some of the product that have plankton extract on them may just be actually plankton extract. Whereas, you know, what Dan's talking about is really these packages of liposomal delivered DNA repair enzymes that have gone through this process where the enzyme is extracted from the cells. So the plankton's grown, the cells are extracted, the cells are then grown, they're broken open, and the little enzymes from thousands of enzymes are extracted and then put into these liposomal capsules. So that process is really complex, and I think that's another thing that we really need to try and get across to people, that a lot of engineering goes on behind the scenes in these products.
Yeah, absolutely. This might be a very, very stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because you mentioned that we do have some of our own, and then plankton-derived ones speed everything up. Do they work symbiotically or do they work individually?
Well, they each have a different characteristic. You're asking about the different DNA repair enzymes?
Yeah.
So they each work differently. So, for example, one of them, the photolyase, the photoreactivating enzyme, works by itself. It works instantaneously, but it needs light. So I wouldn't recommend putting on the photolyase and then turning out the lights and going to bed. That's something that should be used during the day or at least early evening. Two other enzymes, one also recognizes cyclobutane pyrimidinimers, UV damage, and it speeds up the normal process, but it doesn't require light. So it can be applied during the day or at night. It doesn't require light activation. So gives the products a strategy, and the other enzyme recognizes free radical damage to DNA, which is also very important. So it's not just the cyclobutane pyrimidinimers, but oxygen radicals, free radicals, and that's what antioxidants are supposed to do. So I would compare antioxidants to sunscreen. You still need DNA repair because the antioxidants don't catch everything. So they give you an opportunity to make a whole skincare regimen. And some of my more recent research is surveying people about how they use products. And many people have a regimen of using products in the morning and products at night. But when you ask them, why do you choose a product for the morning and why do you choose a product at night? Well, they don't really know. It's a convenience, it's a habit, it's where they store it. They know not to use retinols in the morning, which is, we can discuss that another time, but it's probably a misconception. But people are in the habit of using products at different times of day. But I think our research has shown it's a big untapped area of education to teach people why to use things. And so it turns out DNA repair also follows a circadian rhythm. Your repair goes on the most late in the afternoon, early evening is when your repair is the highest, and then it slows down in the morning. So the general skin strategy is protect myself during the day. I'm gonna reduce blood flow. I'm gonna increase the barrier. I'm slowing down all the metabolic process. And then at night, okay, now it's time to do repair. It's time to do metabolism, increasing blood flow. And we have the circadian rhythm. And if you know that and you know the enzymes, then you can start to have a rational skincare strategy.
There was a term you used, Dan, I've forgotten it now, not moral dilemma. It was to describe how, I mean, we see this a lot in dermatology where people put on their sunscreen and then they think they're invincible and they go out in the sun,
Yes,
which is not what you're
moral
trying to do.
hazard.
Moral hazard, yes. So the moral hazard, and I've spoken to some other dermatologists about DNA repair enzymes, and they've said that exact same thing. They've said, oh, if you tell people that this is going to repair their DNA, then they're just going to want to go out in the sun, which is not what we want people to do. It's
No,
not
no.
invincible.
It's the same argument with seatbelts. People said, oh, well, if you put on a seatbelt, then you're going to drive faster.
Yeah.
Well, we've gotten past that. We use seatbelts and we tell people don't drive fast.
If we're looking at something on the back of a product, should we be looking at how much is actually in there?
Well, from a practical point of view, they don't disclose concentrations in cosmetic packaging. They list ingredients in the order of concentration from high to low, but they don't tell you how much is in each amount. If they talk about the repair enzymes, then they're likely to be using it at the right concentration because it would be useless to tell someone you're doing something and not do it. The enzymes are expensive. They're not a cheap ingredient. So if a company is going to be putting their enzymes into the product, they're going to describe it. If
Yeah.
they don't describe it, then it's probably not there.
They almost came close to being regarded as a drug, which was something that you were quite interested in to know.
So DNA repair enzymes are a preventative treatment, really, and I think probably it's difficult to prove something is preventative. It's much easier to prove something can treat a disease that's already there. You use something and it treats it or it doesn't, and it's quite obvious. So to prove something is preventative is quite difficult. But Dan actually did that. I mean, he did some amazing studies on patients with xeroderma pigmentosum. I don't know if you wanted to talk about those, Dan.
Yeah, so some of the first places we started using the enzymes is in a rare disease called xeroderma pigmentosum. And these people have a genetic defect in their DNA repair. And so, to a greater or lesser extent, they can't repair damage to DNA. And they have to stay out of the sun. They burn very, very easily. In fact, the typical thing that happens is a baby's presented at the pediatrician, and the mother says, I just was out for 10 minutes and look at this sunburn. And then the doctor says, well, that's child abuse. It wasn't 10 minutes. You left her out all day, and that's why she has sunburn. Because they so regularly develop skin cancers, we did a clinical study for a year where they used the DNA repair enzymes, and we were able to measure a statistically significant reduction in actinic keratoses and also in basal cell carcinoma. In that 1 year, there just were not enough melanomas to come to a scientific conclusion. There just weren't enough in 1 year, and that it was in 30 patients all over the world. In fact, there were quite a few in England because I had a very strong collaborator, Dr. Anthony Young, who helped recruit patients, and Dr. Hawk, who passed away last year. So this was some of the best evidence that increasing DNA repair can have immediate effects. So preventing actinic keratosis in less than a year shows that it's not just stopping the mutation, but preserving the immune system, which allows you to get rid of the actinic keratoses. So I'm not a lawyer, and regulatory affairs verge on the law, and sometimes the law doesn't make a lot of sense. So, for example, in the United States, sunscreens are regulated as a drug. In Europe, they're a cosmetic. Another example is retinol and retinoic acid. So, that's vitamin A. So, in the body, retinol is converted into retinoic acid. But if you make a retinoic acid product, it's a drug. If you make a retinol product, it's a cosmetic. And this just has to do with the regulations, not with any scientific explanation. So you're right, Claire, the requirements for preventive medicine are so difficult, and we're seeing this now with vaccines. And the huge controversy all over the world, but particularly in the United States, about what constitutes proof for a vaccine. We thought this debate was over with, but it's not. So our regulatory system is not well built for developing prevention, even though physicians and healthcare would tell you the investment in prevention is well rewarded by not having to treat people. So my interest was always in getting the technology into the hands of the people and having the most effect. And there came a critical moment where the company that I had built, we were acquired by Estee Lauder, and I made the decision that I thought this was the best way to get the technology into the market rather than continuing the biotech route, which is, you all know, you raise money, you spend money, you raise money. And it's a crapshoot whether you're ever going to get any of that back. Many biotechs with great technology fail. So it's from the system point of view, I wanted to get the technology to market, and this is the way that we did it.
And I think in a way you're right, because if it was regulated as a drug, then there would be a lot of people that wouldn't have access. And it's the same with a lot of other skincare ingredients that we know work, things like retinols and niacinamide and vitamin C that have a lot of good quality data now. If we made all drugs, then they would be removed from the market and they wouldn't be accessible. And they're actually very, very safe skincare ingredients that we know are effective and beneficial for skin health. So actually DNA repair enzymes being in cosmetics is much, much more useful for us. I think it just comes down to the claims on the product, so we can talk about DNA repair enzymes here and we can talk about how fascinating the research is and, all the work you've done with actinic keratosis, but actually then claiming a product with DNA repair enzymes on the packaging that can repair actinic keratosis, that would not be allowed. And I think that regulation makes sense because what regulators don't want is cosmetic ingredients starting to claim drug claims. One of the reasons we're here talking about this ingredient today is so that it can get into more people's hands, because I think things like the antioxidants people understand, and retinols are kind of household names now. DNA repair enzymes, not so much.
No, you feel like they've almost been hidden under a bush. And really, for somebody like me, it could have been a life changer in many, many ways if I'd known that these did actually exist or worked a few years back, rather than me just being a cynical journalist and walking past it sort of going, oh, yeah, sure. Because literally, you don't hear about them.
The point about claims is absolutely right. The market is about claims. And I've gone and done lots of public speaking. And when I go to high schools and I talk to kids, of course, I talk about sun damage, and the boys just tune me out and the girls are listening. And when I talk about skin cancer, they're not so interested. But when I talk about aging and the effect of DNA damage on aging, all of a sudden their ears perk up and they pay a lot of attention.
Yeah.
So probably our public approach to talk about anti-aging is more effective than trying to scare people about skin cancer, even though they both are tightly connected.
Absolutely. We will get to that. But you now have put these into one of your products.
Yeah.
How did you do it to make sure that they were actually working well?
We have put 1% DNA repair enzymes in there, and we're quite open about that because we know that is the level that is active in the skin. And we've used the ultrasomes, which are from Micrococcus lysate, and they're the endonuclease which work without light, and we've also used the photosomes, which are photolyase. We actually use them in an SPF product, and I know you've talked about this before, Dan, as to whether using DNA repair enzymes together with SPF is the right way to go, because it's difficult from a formulation perspective. But our DNA repair enzymes are actually formulated with encapsulated filters. So while the DNA repair enzymes have been designed in this very complex way to be transdermally absorbed that Dan spoke about, The encapsulated filters have actually been designed in the completely opposite way. So they're designed in this oil-water bubble, which is a micron in size, and it's very, very stable. And it is designed not to penetrate the skin. It's designed to sit on the surface and stay put while the enzymes are being absorbed. So even these encapsulated filters in themselves are fascinating because they're negatively charged, so they form this even film on the surface. And I think that's probably the way that UV filters are going to go, because people are worried about things like systemic absorption. Even though we spoke about this, we spoke to a toxicologist about that last week, Dan, how it may not be something that we should be worried about, but people still are. So our filters are encapsulated, so there's just no worry about that. So I think, all of this biotechnology that we've really seen progressing in the last 5-10 years in skincare is resulting in very innovative new formulations, and we're very proud of Age Defence. It's a really nice cream.
And there are quite a few on the market now that are in them. I think you have a little list of them, actually, don't you, of ones that are...
Yes. I mean,
not to make it sound like a complete
I don't know, Dan's probably been involved with some of these, but, just to be all-inclusive, Dan, because we don't want to be, just talk about our product. In the US, I think you probably actually have access to a lot more of the DNA repair enzyme products than we do here. So, there's things like Neova have DNA repair damage, there's Photozyme, there's Istin, Erifotona product, there's the HelioCare 360 AK fluid. Dr. Gendler now has Smart Drops, which have DNA repair enzymes. And then, of course, here we have our Age Defence. So as we talk more about these ingredients, more companies will start to incorporate them. And I think as the ways of manufacturing them possibly improve, like the biotechnology might lead to new process where they can be produced in the lab, kind of from biofermentation, as opposed to having to be taken from plankton extracts. I think as things like that improve, the cost will maybe come down of these enzymes, and we might see them in more products, which of course again will benefit everyone, which is what we want to see, and which is why I think Dan is out there promoting these products, because obviously he sees how incredibly effective they are and wants the general population to know about this.
Where do you see this going in the future? Would you like to see them in all day creams, SPFs and night creams, or what would be your ideal picture of this in the future?
Well, I think they're products, and Claire's described, brilliant formulation. There's always new formulation technology. It's an advancing field, so that's great. So I would like to see it used more commonly. I'm not as concerned that we don't have the right products. If you want to use something in the morning, there's products for it. If you want to use something at night, there's products for it. Understanding why you use something in the morning or something at night, and getting people into the habit of using it. Too many people come to me with a sunburn and they say, well, what can I do for this? I heard you know all about this. I want to say to them, you should have talked to me yesterday, not today.
Yeah.
So, sort of this idea that it's a fire hose and I'm going to wait until the house is on fire and then I'm going to go looking for the fire hose. That's the part that I would like to change. That this become a regular habit, because even before you get a sunburn, you have DNA damage. It's not just the instances of going to the beach on vacation when you need DNA repair, but it's every day. So the easier it is to apply and the more you have it in a habit, that's what I would really like to see.
One of the interesting things maybe that, Dan, you could talk about as well is the fact that these enzymes, things like an antioxidant. So, an antioxidant donates its electron and then it's kind of job done, that's it. But these enzymes are catalytic, so they repair one little bit of DNA, then they move on and they keep moving on. So if you could talk a little bit about that, and then how long they actually last once they get into the cells that they're in. Is it kind of 12 hours, do we think? 24 hours?
Yeah. Well, you make a very good point. These are enzymes and they don't get consumed in the reaction, but they do their chemical work and their workers, they move on to the next part. So remember, they bind to damage, and then when they repair it, there's no reason to be bound anymore, so they jump off the DNA and they bind to another site of damage. So these enzymes work over and over again, and that works to our advantage because we don't have to deliver a slathering of DNA repair enzymes like you do with a sunscreen. You have to physically repel the photons. Here, the enzymes jump from damage site to damage site. And in fact, the concentration that's chosen speeds up the rate of repair so fast that it's something else that's rate limiting, but it's not the recognition of the DNA damage. So a small amount of these enzymes can work very well. When we've looked for how long do these enzymes stay active in skin, it's about 12 hours. So when you put on something today, you can't really count on the enzymes being around the next day. They're proteins, they get degraded just like any other protein inside the cell gets turned over. So that's why it's good to have a habit, a regimen. So at a certain time of day, you use your DNA repair enzymes.
How do these actually work then in terms of elastin or collagen or preventing fine lines and wrinkles? What do they do?
Right. Well, we've talked a lot about cancer, which takes several years. But once a cell is damaged, it sends out stress signals telling the body we've got to repair things. And you see that in a sunburn, which is a lot of erythema, where the blood vessels have dilated and you're bringing in all your nutrients and blood to try to fix the situation. So there's lots of signals that go out. One of the signals turns on enzymes that degrade collagen. And it might seem like a stupid thing to do, but this is a wound healing response. And when you have a wound, you debride the damaged area, you get rid of all the dead stuff, and that makes it easier for the skin to repair. Another signal that goes out is to, as we discussed, melanin. A signal goes out to the melanocytes. Hey, we've been damaged. We need some melanin over here to protect us from the next go ahead, the next damage. So pigmentation, dyspigmentation, we call them age spots, are places where melanocytes have just gone crazy because they're constantly getting a signal that there's damage. Immune suppression we talked about, and that's why I say it's never too late. Even if you've had damage in the past and there's things that are going to happen, keeping your immune system at top-notch level is critical. And damage, one of the signals that goes out is to suppress the immune system. So I think there's more and more things we are learning that the cell uses to respond to DNA damage, and that's going to have lots of consequences. One of the hot topics, if I can just take 1 second, is to talk about senescence, and that's the new buzzword in longevity and aging. And senescent cells, sometimes called zombie cells, they've sustained so much damage that they can't function, but they're not sustained enough damage so that they die. And so they sit in your skin and send out stress signals. There's even a name for it, SASP, senescent-associated secretory proteins. And they're just constantly sending out this message, I'm damaged, SOS, there's trouble. And so aged skin has a large amount of these stress signals, and we even made a word, inflammaging, not one of my favorites, but it's a buzzword in the business, and it refers to these signals that are sent out by senescent cells. And so the more we learn about the biology of the skin, the more we find that many of these things trace back to DNA damage.
I thought it was a very clever word. I quite liked it, actually.
Inflammation.
Yeah.
You say tomatoes, I say tomatoes.
We absolutely do.
Just with the senescence, can I just add a little bit? So with our age defence, there's a molecular biologist in the UK, Professor Mark Birchmachin, and he can do some incredible testing of skincare in his lab. Mark did some testing on our age defence product, and what we did was we basically got 3D reconstructed skin, so not skin explants, but basically it's very, very similar to skin. And he blasted it with a UV solar stimulator, so it's like 90 minutes in, midday Mediterranean sun. So we did an area that wasn't using the product and one area of skin that had the product on, and we did RNA sequencing on it to look at markers of senescence. We looked at MMPs and we looked at inflammaging as well, but senescence markers were one of the things that we looked at. Obviously the skin that didn't have product, the senescence markers shot up. We tested P16 and P21, and the skin that had the product on it, the markers were basically baseline. So, using these products with SPF and DNA repair enzymes absolutely does protect you from cellular senescence in the long run, which protects you from inflammaging. So we have a lot of data to show that, it's definitely beneficial in the long run. But I think, as you said, what people are asking about is wrinkles and aging. So it's just kind of communicating that message that all of this very kind of complex science does actually lead back to less wrinkles and less pigmentation. The other thing I think about when I think about DNA repair is that it's kind of the rate limiting step for everything else. So when you think of your other skincare ingredients like the retinoids and peptides and antioxidants, they're kind of stimulating, but for any of those to work, you need an intact functioning cell. So the DNA of the cell needs to be working properly. The template needs to be working properly for the peptides to be able to stimulate collagen, for the retinoid to work on the retinoid receptors and the antioxidants to do their job. So kind of without intact DNA, the rest of it's just not going to work. So I think it is actually kind of the rate limiting step in skincare anyway.
Absolutely, and that's why I think I say it over and over again, it's not too late. So many times people tell me, oh, I was abused myself as a kid in the sun, and now whatever happened is I can't do anything about it. And it's studies like you've just mentioned, I think, are fantastic that shows people it's what goes on right now that affects your skin, not just what happened in the past.
But you mentioned the cumulative damage that happens over the years, and you're saying that it's not too late. But how much could you expect then to get it as an improvement? Can I go back to being my gorgeous 20-year-old self? A little optimistic.
That I'm not going to promise, but you can avoid a lot of the sequelae of aging, the wrinkling of the skin, and people feel better about themselves. They don't need to go back to being 20 years old if they just feel good about the way they look and that they don't feel like they're obviously aging and decrepit. So I would never set the goal that you have to go back to being 20, but you have to look healthy for your age. That, I think, is the real goal here. Maybe one day we'll be able to reverse all the collagen damage and things that accumulate and are slow to be repaired. But right now, looking healthy for your age, I think, is a reasonable goal.
Dan, you mentioned that some of these enzymes can help with DNA damage from other sources, like from pollution. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so one of the common forms of pollution, I'll just start out with one, there's others, are air particulates. They're called PM 2.5, particulate matter 2.5 microns, are very small, and they come from incomplete combustion of fossil fuels. So gasoline, coal in parts of Asia is still a very important heating source. And these little particles are just coated with oxidizing chemicals. That's just the chemistry of them. And when they land on your skin, they release all these oxidizing compounds that go searching, as you said, they go searching for electrons, and one great place to find them is DNA. And so air pollution is a contributing factor to aging. There was a study done in Germany that measured different aging components in people who lived right next to a freeway and then 10 miles away from the freeway, and they could detect differences. And it was directly correlated to the amount of PM 2.5 in the air. So that's just one source of pollution that oxidizes components of the skin. And these particles, Estee Lauder had a laboratory in Shanghai, and I had the people set a filter out, a 2 foot by 2 foot filter for one day. And then we brought it in the lab and washed off all the particles and put them on cells, and they were not happy. And the technicians were terrified now to go outside when
Yeah.
they found out exactly what's in the
We
air.
need to get out of London, Fiona.
I know we do. I lived in Moscow for an extra number of years, and so people don't believe me when I say, but it's like 8 lanes of traffic going that way, 8 lanes of traffic going that way, and that was completely around me in a square. So you can imagine every day when I came home and I wiped down a bench or looked at my windowsills, they were black. It was not
Yeah,
nice.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
those are all those little particles. Unfortunately, we also breathe them. So
Yeah.
2.5 penetrate pretty deep into the bronchi. So air pollution is a concern, and also ozone. We've all heard about ozone. Well, ozone is oxygen, 3 oxygens that are linked together because they don't have enough electrons to make them all happy. So ozone is another oxidizing agent that goes looking for some place to steal electrons, and DNA is a great place from it. So there's direct correlation between ozone level and pollution and DNA damage that's been measured in cells. So air pollution also doesn't respect clothing, and it doesn't respect the time of day. It's not like the sun where you can use an umbrella and confine your activities to late in the day. Air pollution is 24/7.
Yeah, but I guess then there are the things that we do ourselves, alcohol, smoking, all of those sorts of things. Does this go some way in helping ameliorate the damage that we do to ourselves?
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, the smoking has a lot of consequences to the
Just to
body.
skin, I mean.
It gets to the skin, although there's lots of evidence that smoking induces the enzymes that degrade collagen. So we all know the classic smoker look, which is premature aging, and that's from the release of collagen degrading enzymes in the skin from circulating compounds that damage DNA. Yeah, so the benzopyrenes are extremely toxic.
So key.
So yeah, all of life is, I mean, I don't want people to think that they should stay inside it
No.
and avoid everything. It's recognize where you're at risk and do what you can to protect yourself.
Just, you know, on the staying inside and avoiding everything, I was lucky enough to be at a meeting with some top level UK skincare scientists last week at the BAD headquarters, and we were discussing the future of science and, you know, where the research should go. There was a lot of talk about skin cancer and UV exposure and all that, but we actually thought, well, do you know what, we need to do some more research on the positive benefits of light, because we know there is definitely positive benefits, and people always talk about UV producing vitamin D in the skin. You know, that's one we always hear, even though we know you only need very small levels of UV. But I think as dermatologists, you know, we need, and skincare scientists, we need to be seen to be having a kind of a more bipartisan view of these things, and not just traveling down one direction of, you know, sunlight's bad, because it's not. You know, we know that visible light improves mood. It's really important for circadian rhythm. So there is a lot of positive benefits, and being outside means that you are generally more healthy and fit because you live an outdoor lifestyle. So there's a lot of benefits, but what we're talking about is just being sensible and protecting your skin from the sun.
If people are going to look for products, on the inky on the back, on that list of ingredients, what should they be looking at? Are there any specific terms that people should be looking at when they're reading the back of a product?
Well, each of the products has what's called an INCI name, which is a private organization that has standardized names so that when you look on the label, you see a word that has a definite meaning. And so the INCI name for photolyase is Anacystis nigilans, or plankton extract. The INCI name for the UV endonuclease, as Claire said, is Micrococcus lysate. And the INCI name for the enzyme that recognizes oxidative damage, which is called OGG1, the INCI name is Arabidopsis thalania extract, which is a
They
little
roll off the tongue, don't they?
yeah, it's left to practice. That's a little mustard plant, but that's the INCI name. And the other thing I'll repeat is something I said before. If a company is going to spend the money to put the DNA repair enzymes in their product, they're going to talk about it one way or another. So if you see plankton extract and there's no discussion of repair or protection, and they just say it's a moisturizer, then it's probably some other type of plankton extract. So I think you have to rely on the reputation of the manufacturer and the fact that they're describing it. If they're going to go to the trouble of spending the money to put it in the product, they're going to talk about it.
Now, you look unbelievably good, so I'm assuming that you're bathing in these products every
I'm glad
day.
my wife isn't in the room right now.
And so, I mean, apart from using DNA repair enzymes, is there anything else that you particularly do? What's your regime?
Well, I shave every day, which is actually an exfoliating treatment. There's been studies done, and most men don't know that they're exfoliating. So I use a moisturizer after that. And I'm very sensitive to retinol, so I can't tolerate retinol. I get red rashes. There are just some people that metabolize it more than others, and I guess I'm one of those. And the other thing I do, I don't wash my face too much. And I don't like to be critical of other people, but overwashing skin strips it of lipids because you're using soap and you're extracting lipids, and you need lipids in skin to retain water. The water's retained in between lipid layers. So I wash my face once a day, and not more, unless there's something going on. And I think when I read regimens, there's a little bit too much washing of the face, especially as we age. We're less producing of oil, the skin's a little bit thinner, and washing 2 or 3 times a day just strips
Yeah,
it. And
it
no
really,
matter what,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Even if it's a soap-free product? Because this is the other thing, people were saying, well, it's all right as long as you're using a soap-free product.
Well, there's no point in washing your face if it's
Yeah,
a soap-free. You might as well just use warm water.
yeah.
There's a lot of work on finding the most gentle detergents, but in the end, it's still got to extract stuff from your skin, and oils are going to go along with it.
Yeah, we see this problem a lot with this whole double cleansing fad, and especially in teenagers with acne, because they tend to just want to clean their face a lot because they think that that's going to help with the acne, and then they do this double cleansing, and then obviously they're stripping the oils from their face, which isn't good, and their skin gets dry and irritated. But again, you're right, as we age, especially kind of for postmenopausal women, the skin does dry out quite a bit, and our water here in London is actually quite hard, so using it a lot to wash the face is very drying. So cleansing balms are actually these kind of nice oily products that are very good for not stripping the skin of its oils. But yeah, I agree that the skin barrier is really important in this whole picture of aging and inflammaging and transepidermal water loss. The skin barrier itself plays an important role.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and just looking healthy.
But you have been using DNA repair enzymes presumably for quite some
Oh
time.
yeah, I didn't get this. So I put on a moisturizer every morning, and I use a lot of sunscreen. I use one of the sunscreens with the DNA repair enzymes, and I've recommended it to several people. And my brother-in-law said to me, "I only use it on my face because it's so expensive, but you said to use it." So there's
Well,
always
at
the
least he's listening.
there's
Exactly.
always the practical side too.
Yeah.
But what I told him is, whatever the sunscreen costs, it's a lot less than a Mohs surgeon.
Yeah.
That is a good point. Absolutely. Are you only using them in the morning with your sunscreen, or are you using them at night as well?
So in the night, no, I don't use the DNA repair enzymes. I let my normal repair go. But there's occasion where I feel a little tight and I put a moisturizer on in the evening. But mostly I put it on in the morning. Maybe I should start putting it on more.
And are there any ingredients that you should or you shouldn't use them with?
And in general, someone's regimen should be to put on the things that you want to penetrate into your skin, put them on first, and then first clean, and then put on the things you want to get into the skin, niacinamide or retinol or DNA repair enzymes, and then put the sunscreen on at the end. You don't want to put the sunscreen on first. And then the only other thing to remember is that these liposomes are lipid soluble, so you don't want to put on a DNA repair containing product and then put on some kind of oil, which will just blow open the liposomes before they get a chance to go. So it's best to put on the DNA repair enzymes, give them a chance to absorb, and then you can put on other products. But there haven't been reports of anything that inhibit them or counteract or cause any adverse effects.
Claire's going to go geeky on you, so, which is not a bad thing. But before she does go geeky, I just wanted to ask one: are there? I mean, these products sound incredibly amazing. Are there any downsides to them?
Well, no, not that we've found. The biggest downside is giving people overconfidence. So the message isn't put on DNA repair enzymes and then you don't have to put on sunscreen.
There is a lot of regret in my clinic, and nobody has ever regretted putting on their SPF. So I'm going to, they're not that geeky. They're just things that I'm interested in. The first one was, do you remember actually the first experiment where you realized that the enzyme was actually repairing the DNA in human skin? Do you remember seeing that and thinking, oh my goodness?
Well, yes, I remember doing it, but the technique we used was harmful to the cell. So the first question, as you pointed out, was could these enzymes ever actually possibly work in cells? And we did it with polyethylene glycol, which is windshield wiper fluid or antifreeze. But it permeabilized the cells, and we got the enzyme in long enough for DNA repair to go on, but the cells didn't live. So that was mind-blowing. Oh man, we can really do this. Now we've got to figure out how to keep the cells alive because no one wants to put windshield wiper fluid on their skin. So that moment I remember, and I collected on the bet. We had a little blackboard and people wrote their name underneath the pro or the con, and they all knew when the experiment was going to be done. So we had to grow up the cells, we had to purify the enzyme, we had to work out the polyethylene glycol. So yes, I remember that very clearly, that I was either going to fall on my face or be a hero.
Well, you've definitely become a hero, that's for sure. The other thing very interested in is obviously way back in our evolution somewhere, we had photolyase, and that gene has been replaced by the clock gene that controls our circadian rhythm. Have you any theories about why that could have happened? Is it because we started living more indoors, or was our circadian rhythm just more important to human survival?
You're right. The gene that used to be used to make photolyase is now a blue light photoreceptor, and it, it tells your body when there's blue light, which of course is sunlight. And that's really important. You change about 10% of your gene expression from morning to night. So it's hard to imagine that 10% of your DNA is changing what it's using just from morning to night. So keeping track of the circadian rhythm is really important if you're going to have this sort of complicated up and down. On the other hand, DNA repair is, without the photolyase, is very efficient. It's able to keep off skin cancer until we're 50 or 60. Now you got to remember, this was at a time when life expectancy was 25 or 30 years.
Yeah.
So no DNA repair for 30 years probably doesn't have much evolutionary consequence, but being able to keep track of day and night, oh, that's pretty important. And it's as we've gotten healthier and our life expectancy is growing that we start to see all the effects that the DNA repair system is good but not great. And we just haven't had enough time in evolution to make our DNA repair system better. There's just as a sidelight, there's a very interesting paper. It started me thinking a lot about eels, blind eels that live in caves in the ocean. So they go through their whole life with no sun. They're blind and they have a photolyase enzyme.
Wow.
So
Really?
why do they have
Why?
it?
And
And
we
the
don't.
yes, well, they're eels, they're reptiles. They have the lineage. So this is something that was just recently published in the last couple of months. And so the authors speculate that the photolyase binds to DNA damage, but it attracts other DNA repair enzymes. It doesn't do the photoreactivation, but it's kind of like it's using its DNA binding to damage property as like here's a flag, come here. This is where we got to repair damage. But
Wow.
yes, it was
Fascinating.
another one of those wonderful surprises in
Yeah.
science when you find out a blind cave worm in the bottom of the ocean has photolysis.
And we don't. That's kind of unlucky, isn't it?
No, it's not
No,
fair.
fair. But, we've got a way around it with these liposomally encapsulated ones. So, and also, photolyase works really, really quickly compared to our nucleotide excision repair. Nucleotide excision repair is kind of clunky, really, compared to photolyase, isn't it?
Yes, it is. There's about a dozen proteins that all have to get together to do our excision repair. And of course, if you have a problem with one of those, you have the disease erythema pigmentosum. So it's complicated, it's clunky, but it recognizes a very wide range of damage, not only cyclobutane pyrimidine dimers, but oxidative damage and even chemotherapy, which are compounds that have been invented in the last 100 years. The human DNA repair system can repair damage caused by cisplatinum and temozolomide and some of the top cancer treating drugs. The human DNA repair system recognizes. So you have this balance of something that's very clunky, but works on lots and lots of stuff. And in bacteria, you have an enzyme which is very simple. One enzyme does the whole work, but it's very specific. It only recognizes what fits the lock and the key. Otherwise, it doesn't pay attention. So the evolutionists said it's probably better to have a wide range of substrates, we say, a wide range of things to work on, even if it's a bit clunky.
I interviewed Claire for my book, which is on menopause, and one of the sections in it was about aging skin and then the propensity of, you mentioned before that, the skin gets thinner, and Claire and I talked in the book about sepsis that results from that. So if we've got this DNA repair type enzyme, is there a chance that, and you mentioned before that it was good for collagen and elastin, that it would actually be good for aging people to use more widely than just on actinic keratosis or in a sunscreen?
Yes, well, the enzymes that are specific for sun are best used on sun exposed skin. So, the face, the arms, and particularly for women, the legs. There's been lots of studies showing that rates of melanoma on legs are much higher in women than men. It's not altogether clear why. Uh, but whole body applications, that's a cost benefit. Body lotions, I've spent a lot of time in the cosmetic industry. Body lotions are inexpensive because you have such large volumes and by and large have very inexpensive ingredients. So from a theoretical point of view, yeah, it would be good to put on OGG1 all over your body so that you can fight oxidative damage. From a practical point of view, it's probably too expensive.
Yeah, which is a shame with an aging population and rising rates of skin cancers and people living longer and
Yeah,
having thinning skin.
yeah, but that's
We
the
need to make them
future, I think.
affordable.
Yeah.
Here, the regulations on oral supplements and various things, basically, you can get away with a lot before anybody pulls you up. So I'm sure there will be a point at some stage where somebody says, here's my supplement with a DNA repair enzyme in it. Do they work orally or do they only work topically?
Probably not orally. So when you take something in your mouth, it goes immediately into a very acidic environment, the stomach, and the liposomes would blow open, and then enzymes look just like a slab of meat. Your body knows what to do with protein when it goes to the stomach. You digest it and it gets absorbed. So this is what the problem that I have with collagen supplements. Lots of people put collagen supplements and talk about collagen some. I've reviewed papers that make claims about collagen supplements. Well, when you take a collagen supplement and you take blood measurements, the level of proline goes up dramatically. So proline is the main amino acid in collagen. So that tells you that as soon as the collagen hits your stomach, it's degraded. The individual prolines are then absorbed and you get a spike in your blood. You might as well just eat anything with proline in it. There's nothing special about eating collagen. That there's no way that the collagen traverses your stomach, goes through the blood, and then gets deposited on the skin. So oral supplements of complex molecules probably doesn't work because they go to the place that the body's designed to digest things.
Good. Let's remember that because it will appear. I'm putting money on that one. That's going to happen.
We've been through
Brilliant.
a lot, I think. I think we've covered everything.
I think we have. Is there a take home message, Dan, that you've got? What's your take home message for these things?
My message is always it's never too late. There are things you can do now to protect yourself, even if you think you've had too much sun exposure in the past. It's ongoing sun exposure that determines your fate. So it's never too late to start practicing safe sun.
Absolutely. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much.
Thank,
It's been
thank you,
my
Dan.
pleasure. Thank you.